A plane lost its roof at 24,000 feet. This is what happened next. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 departed Hilo International Airport on April 28, 1988. The flight was to Honolulu, an hour away. Just minutes after takeoff, a tremendous boom rocked the airliner. Without warning, the first-class cabin roof collapsed. All aboard panicked. Would they fly away? Is an emergency landing possible? Would the plane fall apart? Stay tuned for this and other scary stories. 89 passengers and 6 crew members, including Captain Robert Skornsteimer and First Officer Madeline Tompkins, were on Flight 243. They had 10,000 hours of Boeing 737 flight experience. The 19-year-old plane was 10 years from its estimated end of life. Earlier that day, it flew to Hilo, Maui, and Kauai from Honolulu. A pre-departure examination finds nothing suspicious. 2 inspectors recently approved a Boeing service bulletin and an airworthiness directive. The plane was ready to fly on paper. As one passenger boarded, she saw a crack in the plane's fuselage midway between the entrance and the bridge hood. She believed the crew knew, so she didn't tell them. The plane took off without a problem after pre-flight inspections passed. The plane began to rise while seatbelt signals remained. The pilots heard it as they leveled down at 24,000 feet. Bang! A loud explosion followed by wind. First Officer Tompkins' head jerked back and she saw insulating foam. Cockpit floaters. The pilots soon discovered the cockpit door was missing. The first-class ceiling should have been. Only the blue sky remained. First-class guests clung to their seats, horrified. A small portion of the plane's left side ruptured, causing catastrophic decompression and 300 mph winds to pull off the roof. Cabin air systems control pressurization, airflow, and temperature. Higher in the atmosphere, there's less oxygen and it's colder. These technologies prevent passengers from suffocating freeze during flight. When explosive decompression occurs, these systems fail, and oxygen masks fall from plane ceilings. Flight 243's top and sides were blown off 18 feet above the passengers' heads, along with their breathing masks. They were still buckled in, but the cabin crew stood by. Tragically, one didn't make it in time. First, attendant Clarabelle Lansing was swept out of the left side hole. Michelle Honda, the number 2 attendant, was flung to the ground but managed to check on passengers and calm them down. Pilots donned oxygen masks in a relatively intact cockpit. Their controls felt loose. The jet was rolling left and right, threatening to crash. Tompkins used the transponder to alert Honolulu that they needed to land on Maui. Her transmissions were unheard due to cockpit noise. Pilots couldn't hear or speak with flight attendants. So they descended using hand signals. They plummeted quickly, eventually falling 4,100 fpm. Passenger jet descent rate. Flight 243's situation was already uncontrolled, so they needed to land as quickly as possible. After 14,000 feet, they descended. Tompkins reached Maui's emergency channel and requested a landing along with medical equipment for many victims. Kahului Airport commenced preparations. First-class passengers suffocated from a lack of oxygen. As they descended, Captain Skornsteimer slowed the plane to ATC limits. At this height, they could breathe and began turning towards the runway. At 170 knots, the plane became less responsive at around 195 mph. To land, he had to reduce speed to 130 knots, or 50 mph. Either slow down and lose control in the air, or land quickly and crash. 170 knots. He told Tompkins to lower the gear. The main gear indicator displayed green, but the nose gear wasn't down. They physically dropped it, but the light wouldn't turn on. Before moving ahead, please like this video and subscribe to this channel for our future updates. They pulled the override handle again, but the light didn't work. They couldn't use a viewer to see if it was down. The captain insisted on landing instead of trying to clear it. If he was mistaken and the front landing gear wasn't down, they wouldn't have struck the tarmac at over 200 mph without any stabilization. They had no choice but to pray. Thankfully, the landing gear lights were broken. Skornsheimer and Tompkins landed successfully 13 minutes after the massive decompression. Emergency services at Kahului Airport were stunned. The plane was a sardine can ripped open. Clarabelle Lansing, one of the 89 passengers and crew, died. Last we checked, passenger jets aren't convertibles. What happened? Well, a plane's fuselage skin is around 2.5 millimeters thick, or 2 credit cards. It's made of 4x2 meter metal panels on Boeing 737s. The edges are drilled and riveted to unite them. Investigators suspected the original hole occurred at these overlap joints, where the skin is weaker. The passenger reported she saw a fuselage crackboarding. She pointed to the same spot investigators think the first hole was before heavy winds ripped off the roof. 2 inspectors missed this crack. How? The FAA only required fuselage inspections along the 2 most crucial joints of older Boeing planes to cut costs. Each airline inspected its own joints. Aloha Airlines didn't test every joint on the plane after 35,496 hours in a salty, corrosive overseas environment. Flight 243's misery was caused by maintenance complacency. U.S. officials revised the inspection process for all older aircraft after a catastrophic maintenance failure. A fleet re-inspection could be requested if a problem is identified on one plane. Clarabelle Lansing's enormous, expensive project was too late. Her body was never located, but the crew's bravery prevented a tragedy. Heroes, indeed. They wouldn't be the last crew to face scary maintenance issues. Flight 5390, BA. On June 10, 1990, 81 passengers and 6 staff boarded a British Airways flight from Birmingham to Malaga. Alastair Atchison and Captain Timothy Lancaster have 2,200 hours of flight time on BA-111s and have had no takeoff difficulties. At 17,000 feet, they unbuckled and told the cabin crew to start food service. But then the unthinkable happened. 27 minutes into the flight, Nigel Ogden entered the cockpit to inquire about breakfast, but then the unthinkable happened. 2 left side cockpit windscreen panes flew out, rocking the plane. Every loose object flew through the cockpit. Captain Lancaster, his body was sucked out head first while his feet were on the control column. The explosion blew the cockpit door from its hinges and crashed it into the console, blocking vital equipment. Because of the captain's feet, the autopilot failed and the jet nosedived. Air Steward Ogden jumped forward and grabbed the captain's waist just in time to save him. As the pressure equalized, the wind roared back in, generating a cockpit tornado. This pinned Lancaster against the fuselage. Atchison couldn't reach the controls because Ogden was holding him. The aircraft dives. He called Mayday over the screaming wind. He didn't know if they heard him. The plane plummeted into busy airspace. 2 more flight attendants forced their way into the cockpit, seizing the captain and stamping on the door. Ogden had no oxygen, frostbite from 350 miles per hour gusts, and felt like his arms were about to be ripped off. 2 air stewards seized the captain's feet when they couldn't hold him. The co-pilot took over and slowed the plane's descent. Captain Lancaster's body slid to the left face against the window. The cockpit sank. He wasn't successful. Ogden opposed releasing his body on principle. He may even be sucked into a plane's engine, bringing it down. Atchison then brought down a 2-pilot plane by himself. The cockpit's charts and checklists were destroyed. It's hopeless. Air traffic control directed him to Southampton Airport, which he didn't know. Without his charts, checklists, or captain, the controller is lost. He successfully made an emergency landing. All 81 guests disembarked without a single injury. Captain Lancaster wasn't so lucky. He was beaten by the plane for 20 minutes in -1.4 F temps. He couldn't survive. His eyes opened as paramedics took his body. Living. He suffered frostbite, bruising, and minor fractures. He returned to duty 5 months after his hospitalization. Miracle. What's up? An inquiry found that the jet had received standard maintenance days before the crash. The captain's side windscreen needs replacing. The shift maintenance manager did it himself. He hadn't replaced one in years, but he didn't look up the method. Plane's Handbook. After removing all 90 windscreen bolts, he realized they were rusted and replaced them. The replacements he used were too narrow by 0.02 of an inch, which caused a problem. The plane was returned to service for Flight 5390 without being inspected. Once in the air, the pressure popped the windscreens and nearly cost the captain his life. It was caused by a maintenance culture that relied on quick judgment calls and ignored safety infractions. The investigation revealed British Airways maintenance engineers underwent major modifications. Shift supervisors couldn't self-certify anymore. Engineers must retrain and recertify every few years. This would ensure any harmful behaviors were immediately dropped, and all pilots would be safe knowing they'd be flying inside their plane from now on. What do you think about our video? Please let us know in the comments area below. If you enjoyed this video and would want to hear from me again, please subscribe and turn on the notification before leaving. Thank you for watching us.